What else do? I spend a lot of the time talking to my agencies, my customers, so Odeon, View, Cineworld, as well as cinema goers, partners in the industry. And a big part of that as a senior manager at a company, and I'm sure these guys will testify to that, is a lot of your authority as the managing director is being better connected and informed than other people. So you say, oh, I had lunch with CEO Profero one day, or I had lunch with Lord Putnam talking about film strategy. Actually, a lot of that is just bringing it outside, being a connection between your company and the outside world. I think, again, that's what planning does really well, is you speak to lots of people outside. You might be working for Heinz Baby Food, but you bring insight from around other clients, which refreshes and adds some diversity to a marketing team, and part of my job is to do that. I think I often get frustrated about the work we do. I think sometimes Fox does outstanding trailers, we do some great posters, we do some great media innovations, we do all kinds of stuff. But a lot of the time, you do get frustrated that if I was all over it and I spent a lot of time doing it, it could be a lot better. And I think that's one of the things which you develop as a manager is actually your job is to get the most out of your people, not to do it yourself. And sometimes, if you can see people getting satisfaction and pride in what they're doing, and you can see it's getting better each time, is you should be micromanaging a team of people. I think the worst managers, and I was very lucky at Channel 4 to have a great manager who didn't micromanage me at all. It was almost let me get on with doing it, and that's how my management style, I think it works effectively, is you get the most out of your people by not trying to micromanage what people are doing. Because the most pride I get is from actually getting stuff done without directly doing any of it. I think that's always a challenge as when I start in planning. People kind of go, what does a planner do? You kind of the account guys set up on a meetings, the creatives do the work. So what do planners do apart from kind of write briefs and maybe do some research groups? And there's always a slight, I think that's changed luckily that was in the mid-90s. I think there's a lot more respect for the discipline now. I think APG have done fantastic work in showcasing the role of planning over the last 15 years. But a lot of it is, as planners, you don't actually have a real craft skill. I think that's a struggle you have with planning generally, is you don't do anything kind of customer facing. You do all the stuff behind the scenes that gets the creators inspired, that sells the work into clients, that actually in a way, and you just take satisfaction for doing that, is you have a role in shaping and creating conditions that great things happen. And that is a role in a way as planning, and that's a great role of management as well, is take huge pride when people do great work. And I think I'd never thought of that. I couldn't have done that, and take pride in that. So I think the greatest job satisfaction I get is actually both for the films and the people who work for me, is giving them their first class ticket through life. So making sure, to me, the most satisfying part of being at Fox for the last couple of years is actually getting people promoted, getting people pay rises, making people feel really good about building their teams, seeing new people come into the business and shaping it. And that is recognising, I guess, for me as a natural introvert, is working out that teamwork and getting people to work together and feeling empowered is a way to get great work. However good you are as an individual, actually the company you work for and a team together really build that together. So that's some thoughts on what it's like. I guess the next question I'd ask is, what's most surprised you having made that transition to the client side? And I think flying to Ireland, which I was at Channel 4, we had a meeting with U2's record label. We turned up in Dublin, and it turned out to be dinner at Bono's house. That kind of surprised me as a kind of thing. When you go client side, actually you have the ability and a responsibility to make things happen. I think that's, in a way, is a slight different to being a planner in an agency. Is as a client, you can, if you want to get U2 to front up an ident for Channel 4, if you want to get Kylie to introduce a music channel, if you want to build take a TV show like Skins and make it into a youth power brand with events all around the country, if you want to get Titanic and showcase a premiere of Titanic at Royal Albert Hall, actually you can do it. There's a responsibility of being a client, which is you're not just necessarily giving counsel, you're actually going, well, what's possible? What can I actually achieve, and how do you make that happen? Which I think is a key difference between being client side and being agency side, is actually you do make these things happen. It's within your power to make these things happen. But I think what most surprised me at being on the client side is actually you're not the boss. I think I found this huge frustration with being on the agency side of, if only clients could sign stuff off, if only clients could listen and understand, and a client agrees with me like this is the best ad, but you can't sell it to the chairman, or the finance director doesn't want to do this. And it's really frustrating when you're the agency. You kind of think, oh, if you go to client side, it's all going to be fine because you're in charge and you're the boss. And that's the one thing which actually, unless you're Steve Jobs, and I think Steve Jobs was the boss of Apple, there's certain types of managers who clearly are the boss. But most people you meet in client sides actually you can't tell anyone what to do. You can't tell your agencies what to do. You can't tell your most junior staff what to do. You kind of shape and guide them, but you can't. It's not like this kind of Stalinist world where you can create a plan and put it all together and expect people to follow what you do, because they're just not going to do it. It's actually identifying that you're a coach more than a manager of people. And I think one of the key challenges of being in senior management, which again, a little bit like being a planner, which is if you fell under a bus, the kind of company would keep going quite happily. It's not going to grind to a standstill if you're the marketing director or the manager director or any senior managers to kind of disappear. And I think the danger to that is a slight insecurity when you go into a company, which is, well, unless there's a disaster, unless the company is performing badly, and Channel 4 was doing really well, Fox was doing pretty well when I started, there's a slight danger, which is to make change for the sake of it, to kind of feel, okay, what's my contribution? I'm the managing director. I've got to change things and put my stamp on things. And actually, there's a slight danger. You start a bit like a planner forcing a brief. It's not a need to change. You shouldn't restructure things because you're not the boss. And actually, what you need to do is listen to people, identify what they think they'd like to do better, how you can support them to be better in what they do. But what surprised me as well is being a planner, three things in common between planning and being a kind of business leader. I think both business leaders and planners are both good storytellers. Actually, the key part of planning, and what I most like about planning and what I like about being at Fox, is you're telling stories to coach, galvanize, and inspire great work. And actually, you kind of see when people, where you create a purpose for what your company's doing, you create a bigger idea than just making a film successful and making profit. What is your core purpose at Fox about? I know in the key films, what's achievable? How can you make? How can make people feel really great at what they do? I think storytelling is a key part which links both planning and business people. The second thing is identifying key insights. And fresh perspectives that cut through all this complexity. Whenever you try and make something happen, I've really found it in both Channel 4 and Fox, is there's all these people with a wealth of data that whatever you try and do, they go, well, the thing is, we tried that, and the thing is, you did this, and it's all really complicated. And actually, I think when you get that breakthrough moment of, actually, let's look at it in a very different way, let's identify an insight and simplify it right down, I think that's how you get people to galvanize it again on the inspiration side. I think as well, good business leaders and planners also give perspective. I think the key thing that I think is interesting, Adam touched on the doing the focus groups, 100 focus groups in the first year. I think in a way that's the one thing I was similar. I started at WCRS and I did dozens of focus groups. All the time you're doing focus groups. It's actually seeing the world through the eyes of the customer and the consumer. That's something which people in business, however much they talk about it, they're not very good at doing because you're so far away. You can't imagine the marketing director running a focus group. You can't imagine the marketing manager running a focus group. Actually, the CEO might say he goes out every now and again and talks to customers and shakes, sees 2 customers a month and talks to his shareholders about what a great man he is. They don't really see the world through the eyes of the customer. And I think that's what giving perspective from a different point of view is really important. Is to have that transformative effect where you look at. I find the same. I'll obsess about the wording on a trailer, and people don't really listen to that voiceover. It's giving a perspective of what they feel, or here's the key outtake. So how and why did you make the journey? To me, I don't know, it'd be interesting from the point of view of other people in the room, but I always found clients' businesses really fascinating. I always saw communication and advertising as a means to an end, not an end in itself. And it always gave me more of an affinity with clients than creatives. And maybe partly of my own weakness. I find creatives a little bit struggle to understand because they make that huge leap and they're not logical and they have their own agenda. I always find creatives a bit more baffling than clients, quite frankly, because there's a logical reasoning we have with clients. And I found the business, to me, great work was all about delivering value for customer and finding ways of creating insights that people engage with as opposed to work for its own sake. But I think it also gave me a great to do great creative, you need trust for your clients. And that, to me, my focus when I was in advertising was always on understanding the client's business and being almost an ally of a client and the voice of a client in the agency. At the same time as challenging a client to think of things differently. And I think that, to me, made a natural step was actually I was more interested in marketing than in creative work for the sake of it. But moving into, and my first role was at Channel 4, where I headed up the marketing for E4, Film 4, More 4, and Launch 4 Music. had a team of 12 marketing professionals, but all of whom were from media, creative agency backgrounds. And again, the first thing I found out was it kind of is a slight, well, who's this new bloke coming in? And we're doing pretty well, thank you very much anyway. And we kind of, what do you know from advertising? We've been in TV for ages. It's always that challenge you come in as a client is, if you go into business that's working, people tend to think there's a slight defensiveness. They will listen to you, but there is a defensiveness. And that's where, in a way, those kind of softer skills which you learn as a planner about actually listening and understanding and saying, look, how can I help you do a better job? How can I help you progress and empower you going forward? And you then also have your own internal clients. And at Channel 4, you have the creatives who commission the programs. You've got the people who design the graphics. You've got this whole world of in a way, it's very analogous to the creative, but how do you make a difference in that context? And that's, one example was at E4, where there's always a way of launching. E4 was a channel which had a great identity. It had the kind of the Peter Dixon voiceover guy. It took the piss out of its programs. It was a great first choice, second choice channel. But coming in there is how can you actually establish this as a purveyor of good quality content? Because the brand didn't really fit with, the brand was always very self-referential, slightly sarcastic. And a key thing there was actually, I can't remember if it was before or after the away day I had with Adam, with the team, but Lobbies was actually taking the team and saying, look, let's think about Skins as being a youth brand, not a TV program. So if you're a youth brand, how do you behave in terms of event marketing? When do you start your marketing? And in a way, it was just seeding the ideas with the team and then getting them to see, actually, you go away, and 4 weeks later, they come back with an amazing plan, completely different to the usual, you do your posters here, your TV spots here, and it's a very formulaic way of doing it. And actually, it was really interesting to see when you give the team an open brief, and I think that's saying with great planning briefs or open briefs, they come back and surprise you with, I never thought about doing that. So that's part of my journey into it. What did I find most useful from being a planner going into business? I think the first thing is actually I started as an account executive, and I think actually WCRS at the time, they didn't hire planners going in. It was days when really there weren't any. I think B&P were the only people who hired planners back in the mid-90s from a graduate training program. So I started as an account exec, but my head of planning said, look, I'm waiting to be a planner, but you need to do your time in account management. And I think in a way it was pretty good, because you do your time, you do all the menial stuff, you do the contact reports, you do the, and there was days when you actually, before email, where you actually had to photocopy them and send them out in individual envelopes because you couldn't email them to client, because email didn't really exist when I started. It's so bizarre. Just as an aside, when I started WCRS, I turned up, and having been to university, I was at Cambridge and a college that invented a computer, you turn up on your first day and you got a pad and a pencil and a phone. And it had a typing pool in the corridor. It was literally the days where you'd write a memo by hand, give it to the typing pool, they'd present it back, you'd make your changes, they'd give it back to them, photocopy it, take it to the other side of the building. So that just shows you the kind of menial crap I had to do when I was never mind the typing pool. I mean, sorry for them. I could have started lower, I suppose. But a key part of that was actually, I think, is doing your time, is sweating the small stuff. It's working with, luckily, to work with some really lazy planners who didn't like doing focus groups. So I volunteered to do the focus groups, and they were like, oh, brilliant, you do the focus groups and report back. That'd be great, Cameron, fantastic. And actually, all of a sudden, you're speaking to more consumers than your client will ever speak to in their entire lives. You looked at more data. I worked on Orange. I was very lucky to work on Orange mobile phones, and I basically went out of my way to learn every single tariff combination known to man and built a spreadsheet to put it all together. And a year later, I had a chief executive, the guy who founded the company, and his senior management team talking about tariffs. And they all realized they didn't actually know anything about tariffs themselves. And it's like, that Cameron bloke seems to know about this stuff, and brought him in. And all of a sudden, because you're doing that, I think we're planning, the key thing is to get your authority with your client, is you do need to sweat the small stuff. And I think it's a real shame that clients don't run focus groups anything like this. And I thought the philosophy at DDB was fantastic about actually you didn't hire research agencies. I think it's a real skill of doing focus groups, doing vox pops, doing all that kind of stuff, which actually I find really useful as a planner, because obviously you need to know your stuff, and that's is a key thing with if you're building a relationship with a client, is there's every reason why you could understand your client's business better than your client understands it. In terms of, if you can identify a specific part, you never understand the complexity of the business, but you can identify a part of your client's business that actually there's no reason why you should be more authoritative on that, and all of a sudden you've then got a connection and a trust with your client. So I worked for likes of Orange, and I know it was quite lucky as well, because in Orange in the days had 4 people in the marketing team. I think they now have 200 people, something outrageous. It's unbelievable how these things grow. But working with those small startup companies is really great as well, because you can actually be a real ally for your client. which to me, being a planner, asking the right questions, taking the right perspective work really well. The other things which I think are great skills in planning is persuasive language and storytelling. I think persuasive language might be a slightly fancy way of saying post-rationalization, which you all find you've done quite often. But actually, post-rationalization is a really important part of a job and any company, because post-rationalizing why you're doing something gives people purpose. It's like, why are we doing this campaign? Why are we doing this product? Why are we doing this media plan? Even if it's bullshit that makes people feel better about what they're doing. And that is a meaningful role for planning to play. I wouldn't feel embarrassed about doing that. Post-rationalization and persuasive language is part of storytelling. It's making people feel, it gives a sense of purpose and direction to what the hell people are doing, which is all really complicated. No one really knows what works in the world of marketing. And if you can create a sense of, well, they kind of feel, it's what's happening and it's working together, that is actually good for business. As long as you don't get kind of misguided, obviously. But the final question is, how can planning be more relevant to clients? I think this is a question that Sarah thought would be a good one to look at. I think, to me, and it's a slightly time, I'm sure we've been having this debate since the APG was invented, but planning as a discipline lacks relevance and coherency. What is planning? I hate to ask that question. But to me, it's more about how can you as planners be more relevant to clients? Because I think actually what makes planners interesting is what it makes it interesting to clients. And I think most planners do have a slightly unique and distinctive DNA. The kind of people who go into planning do tend to be introverts in the world of extroverts, do tend to be polymaths who just see interesting things for the sake of it, rather than having a means to an end. It's, let's read a book on quantum mechanics and see what relevance that might have to advertising, which I can talk about at length if you like. But it's actually seeing connections that other people miss. I think there's a DNA we should get with planners versus account people and creators. They're all a little bit different. I think actually it is that which makes planners really interesting, because you're interesting people, you have an interesting perspective, which is different from what you'll find at most client companies. And I think that's why I always really like speaking to planners, because they have a different perspective. And I think, but combining that with a sense of confidence, I think one lessons I learned certainly was you need to put yourself out there. You need to actually go and present. You need to you don't want to be the account guy kind of putting you out, and the account guy telling you what to do, and the account guy trying to own a relationship, and the creative's not really knowing the brief. Actually, you do need to put yourself out there, and is that, in a way, is a dynamic of kind of confident introverts, which makes kind of clients, makes planners interesting. I think also as well, being relevant to clients is you spend a lot of time understanding consumers, take great pride in understanding consumers. I think actually your customers, the people who pay your salaries, are actually your clients. And if you treat clients are kind of irrational, illogical, complicated organisms, and that's how, and you sit in a client, you can see when you do have the archetypal chairman's wife, they all exist, they all have these people that have prejudices, and that is an important part of what you do. That should inform the plans and the thinking as much as the truth. There's no truth in advertising. There's no, you might go away and find this ideal solution, but if it doesn't connect with your customer, which is actually your client, it's not really going to work. I think the other question is, what are the key barriers for planners in business? And I think, broadly speaking, there's a couple of stereotypes, and I think I see myself in both of these stereotypes. Perhaps I may be simplifying, but I think there's a couple of planning stereotypes very broadly. And one stereotype, which I see quite a lot from planners that being on the client side, is this slight, typically young male planner, is this sense of swagger and kind of, I've got an opinion and I've kind of not really, but they haven't really done the work. And I find it increasingly, I sound like an old git, but certainly with some of the younger planners you get, they kind of don't do all the hard graft that maybe used to. I don't know, but you do get a sense of actually, you can get a sense of a planner who can become a know-it-all that doesn't really know their stuff particularly well, but are very persuasive and confident and charming, but you kind of go, I don't really believe them. And I think that's where you need to really know your stuff inside out and have a knowledge and a craft skill. And the other stereotype, which again, the two do overlap. I don't think they're two different people, but it tends to be more of an experienced, typically more of a female type of planner, but incredibly organised, incredibly knowledgeable, sits in the office getting work done, does all the data analysis, done all the focus groups, and has come up with the answer. Got the solution here. And if anyone challenges that, it kind of stops falling apart a little bit, because all of a sudden the beautiful thing that's been created all of a sudden is being challenged. And I think a key part of planning is no one knows the answer. What you do is you help the clients get to that answer. It should be a dynamic thing. And I've had a couple of instances of my media planners where I had a great presentation. It's a bit like, the but that's just not right. And you can pull it apart, and you can see them getting flustered. And it's not, I'm not trying to undermine what's been presented. I'm not trying to say you're wrong. I'm just, actually, I need to apply that to my own understanding, and how can my team get their heads around that. And I think it's that kind of going with a flow, which sometimes, when you've spent so long coming up with a perfect plan, and those insights, actually, you need to go over the flow about, okay, this is a means to then to get the clients to come to a better solution. I think, in a way, that's where McKinsey's is interesting as a, the reason why they're successful is McKinsey's don't try and give the answers as such. We try and help you then get to the answers you want to get to. It's almost stimulus as opposed to a solution. I think agencies pretty too quickly jump to a solution as opposed to a method to get to that solution, which is owned by the client and owned by that organisation, as opposed to here's an idea which has come up from the outside. So, and I guess the key thing, the final thought is I think planning in its kind of old-fashioned sense can be quite Newtonian and mechanical. It's like you can plan something, you can have an answer. There's insights which are true. I think actually planners actually is much more quantum. I think quantum in the sense that, I started university doing natural sciences, and I got completely baffled by quantum mechanics when all of a sudden this model you have in your mind about how atoms work, you go, it's not really like that. The atoms could be anywhere in the universe at any point in time, and it's all about probability fields. And actually there's a thing about quantum which is all about, the role as planners is about creating a climate in which great things happen. There's all manifold possibilities in any creative brief. Actually, what you need to do as a planner is guide people towards positive outcomes. This could go this brief, this pitch could go any one of 10, 15 different ways, and we'll do so simultaneously. How can you guide that into actually the best possible outcome? And that is a role of the planner, is really about shaping and guiding that in a way, a quantum outcome, as opposed to planning something you then pass on to the creatives. You then create a work that then is presented to the media agency, which is, I know is not really how planning works, but that is a kind of the Newtonian model of planning. So that was kind of my thoughts from my purely personal perspective on that. So thank you.